Welcome to everyone to the headliner number 1 session with Mary Heglar and Amy Westervelt. My name is Mikkel Lejean. I'm the Associate Campaign Director at Corporate Accountability, and I also have the distinct honor and privilege of serving as a board member on PowerShift Network. Before I get into the intros, it was really hard to captivate really shortly and concisely 2 folks that have contributed to moments in my own activism. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of a personal reflection when I think about these 2 incredible headliners. When I was coming back from a few international conferences, the UNFCCC, I remember back in November of 2018, reading a Vox article that Mary Heglar had written and feeling like my internal turmoil had been splayed on a page and had been written so rawly and authentically, and feeling a burst of energy that I could continue doing this work for the long haul. And when we think about truth tellers and folks that name, shame, and put the blame at the feet of the institutions and the people that have driven us to the edge of climate catastrophe, Amy Westervelt is one of those folks that constantly comes up as a premier journalist in this movement. And so it's really important that we're talking about narrative and that we're talking about truth tellers. And without further ado, let me just get into the introduction. And my internet cut out because it's been horrible all day. Can folks hear me still?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So first, Mary Anais Heglar is a climate justice writer and essayist. Her work responds emotionally to the climate crisis, as well as drawing links between racism, colonialism, and climate justice. She's the co-host and co-creator of the Hot Take newsletter and podcast, which takes a holistic, humorous, and humane look at the way the climate crisis is covered in the media. She's originally from Port Gibson, Mississippi, by way of Birmingham, Alabama, and is currently based in New York City. Amy Westervelt is the founder of the Critical Frequency Podcast Network, which produces and distributes multiple climate podcasts, including Hot Take, which she co-hosts with Mary. Amy is also an award-winning print and audio journalist who has contributed to the Washington Post, the New York Times, The Guardian, NPR, and many other outlets. In 2007, she won a Foley.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Mikkel, we lost your audio.
Uh-oh.
Okay, where did I?
You're back.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. And Amy in 2007 won a Folio for her feature on the potential of algae as a feedstock for biofuel. In 2015, she was awarded a Rachel Carson Award for Women Greening Journalism. And in 2016, she won an Edward R. Murrow Award for her series on the impacts of the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada. In 2019, her other climate podcast, Drilled, a true crime-style podcast about climate change, was awarded the 2019 Online News Association Award for Excellence in Audio Storytelling. Welcome to Mary and Amy, and welcome to all of you joining us from wherever you are. Thanks so much.
It's been so long since I've talked to you, like an hour.
True.
Anyway.
I feel like we should show everyone our shirts. Hold on.
We should, yeah. All right, so there's yours. I don't know if people can see mine. Mine says, "Fuck Mars and fuck Elon Musk." It's a quote from Amy Westervelt. No one other than Amy Westervelt.
And mine says, "The oil and gas industry is gaslighting you." And it's a quote from Mary Anais Heglar.
Edit and omit it.
Yes.
So, we talk about each other on Twitter and I hope nobody was expecting us to come on and be like super serious, because that's just not how we roll. But yeah, so I thought maybe we would just start by talking about how we met, because people here, if they know us, they probably know that we talk about, each other's work wives and all of that other stuff, and clearly like rep one another. I wear this shirt whenever I miss Amy, which is all the time, which means
that's true.
Shirt smells.
Same. I haven't heard in like 4 different sizes, just depending on the mood.
Oh yeah, I have a tank top too. But yeah, so we should talk about how we met. So I first heard of you by hearing about the Drilled podcast at a dinner party with like a bunch of other climate themed people back in the spring of 2019. And I was like, oh my God, a climate podcast. That's brilliant. And I binged that joint in one weekend. Like, I was so spellbound by it. Anybody here who hasn't listened to Drilled, I strongly encourage you to go do that, and you will want to troll fossil fuel companies all day long. So anyway, I was like listening to the podcast over and over again, and then finally, like, I worked up the nerve to slide into your DMs. Because you were so secretive on Twitter. I didn't know where you lived, and I was like, what if she lives in New York? Oh my God, what if I could like be friends with her?
Because my location on Twitter is up your butt.
Basically. And then I got my feelings hurt and found out she lived in California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Mary was like, we're having a dinner party. And I was like, oh, I wish I could go.
Yeah,
but
I also made that up. We weren't having a dinner party.
Really?
No.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, then we met in person next time I was in New York. So it was good.
Right.
Yes.
And then shortly after that, we started talking about coming up with a climate podcast of our own. But yeah. I thought, you're like the queen of climate podcasts. You have a whole network about it. You've worked on so many shows. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about just like the climate podcasting scene as a whole, since you've been a part of it.
Yeah, I feel like when I started working on Drilled, actually I tried to pitch it to podcast companies, and people said there was no audience for climate podcasts. So I just made it anyway, and then there was an audience, and now there's like 1 million climate podcasts. The end. No, there's I think like Drilled got like a pretty good size audience, and then you and I started talking about the fact that there wasn't like, I don't know, just a show, like a more of a talk show on climate that wasn't an interview with scientists, and that there wasn't a media criticism show about climate, which sounds so niche, but actually has led to lots of different directions.
Yeah. So you first started talking to me about doing a podcast on my own, and I was like, have you lost your goddamn mind?
Yeah, like, it was just gonna be Mary reading her own pieces.
It was gonna be me reading books. No, like that's what it was. I was gonna like take a novel and try to find the climate theme and talk about it, which like now just sounds so incredibly, I don't want to do that. That would run out of steam really fast. Yeah. And so then you started talking about like, oh, maybe I'll do another news related podcast. And then we started talking about like, basically what we were texting about anyway, which was like media criticism, which like, it does sound niche, like we were saying, but everybody's kind of a critic and everybody consumes the media. And also the media has been a big problem as far as how climate change was allowed to get to this point. And you know that better than anybody because you've been doing climate reporting for, I want you to be the one to say it.
Years. It's 20 years. I'm that old. Yeah.
2 whole decades. So yeah, you've seen some stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was a big part of our initial conversations was like, oh, a lot of the trends that we're seeing now are things that have happened before. And also just, how do we reshape the climate narrative if we're not talking about the climate narrative?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And it's like the media to a large extent decides what's important and what's not important. Yep. They decide how you understand things, how you frame things, who you blame. They decide who's the villain in the story, who's the hero in the story, what the setting is, right? Like they are the first drafters of history. And so if our media institutions are failing, which they largely have, and we'll talk more about this, but they kind of oscillate between like not covering climate to like, it's the story of our lifetime and we're going to cover it that way, to not covering climate at all. And then it's like these waves over and over again. And there's no one really taking taking on the work of holding them accountable to their commitments. So
Yeah.
that's a big part of what we want to do with Hot Take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird thing, right? Because if the media doesn't want to hold itself accountable, it's kind of hard for it to have any accountability.
Right.
Because I mean, I've tried pitching things to different places, and it's like, well, they don't, I don't know. In most cases, media outlets don't love running pieces that are critical of things that they also do.
Right.
So,
Right. And I mean, I remember when I first started writing, so I started writing publicly in like 2018 on climate change, late 2008, well, actually early 2018. And I could not get my stories pitched anywhere because like when I first started writing about climate and emotion, people were like, oh, that's stupid. Why don't you write about like the solutions to climate change? I'm like, I feel like people are writing about that, but also define solution. You know what I mean? Like solutions to climate change go beyond solar panels. They go beyond wind turbines. Like this is a problem. Like they're like, oh, we have all the solutions. We just need political will. Well, actually, that's a big fucking problem.
yeah.
And that's a narrative problem.
That's a big
communication and culture problem. You can't just be like, well, you know, we'll get around to that political will thing one of these days. Like that's
right.
Not a solution.
Right. Like the idea that you're going to change, that we can just plug all our stuff into something new and deal with political will later is
well, you can't even get the political will to change the plug, homie. Like you got
right.
Like, you got work to do. This isn't a science problem. This isn't a math problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was really fun coming up with the concept for the show. And then like we kept trying to figure out what to name it.
Yes.
We
had a lot of like bad. I wish I could find the list of names that we
I'm glad you can't. I remember one of the titles we got, like we were actually almost close to doing it. It was The Understory. Remember that?
Oh, that's not bad. I think there's another podcast that's called that though. Or maybe
there's one called The Overstory.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sierra Club. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
But when we went through all of these bad names for like 3 days, and then I woke up one morning and was like, Hot Take. Like, that's what we're doing. And it was like, I made you promise like to let me be as silly as I wanted to be. I could tell dad jokes. We could curse, and we didn't have to, like, we can take climate change seriously, but we can't take ourselves seriously.
Yes. Yeah, because that gets back to the whole, like, you're not allowed to talk about the emotions involved in climate. You know, that like, you're not allowed to like tell jokes if you're talking about climate. You're not allowed to curse. You're not allowed to be mad. You know, you can be sad, but only in a very particular way. And
you have to be hopeful.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Like it gets old. Yeah. So when we first started, we decided we would do these year in review episodes. And honestly, that was one of the most eye-opening exercises. So we decided to do 2016 to, at that point, 2019, all the Trump years. And one of the most fascinating things to me was like 2016 and 2017 was one episode. It was like 1 hour. Or maybe slightly more. And then the 2019 episode, I think we recorded for like 3 to 4 hours. Like our throats were sore by the end of it because the story had just exploded in between that amount of time. Like the amount of climate coverage in 2019 was just crazy.
Yes.
But still at the same time, not enough.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then it took a giant jump off a cliff in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, that was disappointing. You want to talk about why that was? I mean, I know, but.
Yeah. Well, you know, the media kind of did this thing where it's like, people cannot hold two problems in their head at the same time. We need to shift our focus to COVID, and in fact, actually, a lot of climate reporters got pulled onto reporting about climate instead. Sorry, COVID instead. Yeah. So it just was like, and then the only kind of climate stories that were happening were like the sort of, oh, COVID is going to reduce emissions. What does that mean for climate? You know?
Earth is healing, all of that sort of stuff, which like that didn't age well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was also like all the climate reporters are also science reporters, which is another reason why climate isn't always framed as the big story that it is because it's always given to science reporters who are great. Like science reporters are fine. But this is also an economic story. This is also a culture story. Like, why aren't those reporters also being pulled into the conversation? So yeah, but it was interesting watching the narrative like explode. I feel like the climate, I want to say climate movement, but that's honestly not all the way right. It was really just, it was kind of everybody, because a lot of people were like brand new to climate change conversation at all, but the climate conversation exploded in 2019 in a lot of really important ways that I want to make sure we break down for our audience. One is that it became a lot more diverse. I feel like there was a public fight about, are we going to talk about climate change as an intersectional justice related issue? Or are we going to continue to talk about it as a science issue? And that was fought in public in 2019. And I think the justice oriented people won. I don't see people say things like, social justice is an impediment to climate action anymore. And that used to be like the norm.
Pretty common. Yeah, like shockingly common. I don't hear as many people saying that, I don't know, that like, that it's asking too much of people to think about it as a justice issue anymore either, you know, like, or the, like, we'll get to that later kind of framing. I just don't see it as much. And maybe like it's still there, but it's just not as common as it was. You know, I think there are certainly still people that are talking and thinking that way. But I don't see it being like treated as the only way to think about it as much, you know.
I never see it treated as a viable way to think about it anymore, honestly. When people do bring up that sort of approach, they are promptly shut down. Which I think is quite an improvement. Like I remember when I published my essay in February 2019 about climate change not being the first existential threat and people of color have had to fight for their lives before. I got dragged between, dragged is the wrong word, trolled, like within my life after I published that. I mean, no regret. But then a year later, I published something else basically saying, if you don't accept the white supremacist roots of climate change, then you're a climate denier. And I was expecting like round 2, nothing happened. Everybody was like, great article, do more of them. It wasn't that reaction at all.
I do feel like, I mean, not at all to say, okay, job done, like, you know.
No, not at all.
But there's been some improvement.
The other thing I think that was really important happened in 2019 was like the emotional spectrum of climate change really opened up. Before it was like, if you challenge the idea of being hopeful, then you were a problem, and like you were using scare tactics, and you always have to leave people on a hopeful note. And you wrote one of the seminal essays on that in 2019, which is like one of my favorites, The Case for Climate Rage.
Oh yes. Yeah, because I was tired of people telling me not to be angry. I find anger to be very helpful. You know, and actually like positive, you know, I find it motivating. So like, whatever, if like anger's not your thing, that's fine. But like, it's very, you know, like, it keeps me moving. It's like that's my hope. Anger is my hope. Okay.
Exactly. Spite is my hope, which is a very close cousin to anger. And, you know, it's what keeps me going. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's what keeps me in Chevron's mentions.
That's right. Yes.
It's a very productive emotion. And I think that, you know, if you can embrace it, but it's also true to be really sad about it. Like I oscillate between feeling despair over climate change sometimes. I feel anger, like, and that's the thing about climate grief is that you can't really get to the end of the cycle because the end of the cycle is acceptance. And
That's
you can't
right.
accept this. So you're gonna keep going around and around and around. And actually, like, that is a good thing because that means that you're still human and you're still feeling.
That's right.
And I think that's why it's also really important for us on our show to have humor. Um, because
Yes.
this is some dark shit.
Yeah.
So
You gotta laugh at like the absurdity of some of this stuff. You gotta throw in some dad jokes sometimes, you know.
like, what are we supposed to do? Like, if I can't laugh and I can't be petty, I don't want to do it.
Right.
So,
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So eventually we realized that we could not keep up with all of the climate stories that were happening like week to week, and that was maybe an unhelpful frame for the podcast, but we kind of moved that stuff into a newsletter so that we could free up the podcast to talk about, how different beats intersect with climate, because that was one of those things that we were seeing people still not connect the dots on. Like, oh yeah, actually prison abolition is a climate issue.
Right.
War is a climate issue.
Right.
Food is a climate issue. Like it's all,
Everything's a climate issue.
right. Like we've been saying for a long time that climate is a lens for all of these things, but we thought, well, if we have reporters from those beats come on and talk to us, and like we talk through, exactly how climate is a filter on those things, then we can maybe help to, help people to see that more.
Yeah, I remember in one of our interviews, someone asked us, like, you covered the election and climate change at the same time. Why did you do that? And I was like, the better question is, how could we not? Like, you do realize it's the fate of the whole world,
right,
depending on this. If you're not talking about climate change when you're talking about the election, you're not really talking about the election. If you're talking about the election without talking about climate change, you can't talk about one without the other, And I think that, like, we need to start seeing climate change the way that we see the economy, right? Like, if you were to write an article about war without including the cost of it, the economic cost of it, people would think it was incomplete. Or any given policy, if you didn't factor in the economic costs, it would be seen as an incomplete article. But when it comes to the climate change costs, you can leave that out, right? Like, we didn't stop talking about the economy when we talked about COVID, did we?
That's right. Nope.
We stopped talking about climate change. You know what you can live without? Money. You cannot live without a planet. You can't do it. I would say I've tried, but I haven't, and I'm not gonna.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. Mary, what was your kind of what sort of beat that we like ventured into was one where you kind of like learned something new? Like, which guest were you like, oh, I hadn't thought about that?
Oh my gosh, that would be so many people. I think the guest I've probably learned the most from, and I don't know, I've learned a lot from every single guest that we've had, because the way we structure our conversations is so like open-ended. Like, we never know where we're going to go when we start going. But I learned a huge deal from Drew Costley. He's been on our show twice. And so the first time we had him on, we talked about local journalism, but we also talked about defunding the police as a climate policy. And he talked about like the pollution that police officers bring into communities of color, which I honestly had not ever really thought about. We also had him on just recently for one of the episodes that I'm most proud of, where we talked about climate change in prisons. And, lots of thoughts about how climate change impacts prisons, not a lot of thoughts for me on how prisons impact climate change. And he like had that sort of knowledge, and also had just like a deep well of knowledge about how restorative justice works and prison abolition works. So what I loved about that conversation was that we did not wind up with all of the answers. And Drew really helped me feel okay about not having all of the answers, just as long as you're trying to think about it. So yeah, that was definitely one of my. Oh, is my cat doing something?
Where's Baloo? Is he trying to
So
start
I
his
said kitty in the
OnlyFans
chat,
business right now?
All right, your obsession with the cat is getting weird. But what were your favorite guests?
I loved David Tamarkin on food. He mentioned especially like the way that food media had sort of fetishized a way of eating that was really not compatible with acting on climate in general. It was like exotic ingredients from all over the world and like super meat heavy and, you know, all of these things that I hadn't really thought about because it had been a while since I had bought a food magazine, to be honest. So I was like, oh yeah, that's true. That was interesting. And then I thought that he kind of connected some dots around, you know, meat eating and masculinity that's really pushed in the food realm too, that I thought I was just super, super interesting. And then I loved, we did a couple of sort of, you know, media on media people who Kendra Pierre-Louis and Lewis Wallace, who both kind of talked about just how the media has evolved in recent years and where there are sort of structural problems in how the media operates and you know, that kind of stuff. So, you know, I like to nerd out on media stuff, as do you.
Yeah. That was definitely right up your alley. Another one of my definite favorites was Antonio Yuhas, where we talked about the connections between oil and war and climate change, because I feel like we talk about that so much to the point where it becomes just like a cliche. And talking to Antonio really helped us to like break it down about exactly how was the Iraq war a war for oil, for oil, and how many other wars have been fought for oil, and what does that look like in the future with like lithium?
That's right.
Can you just quickly explain the lithium?
Just, you know, I mean, this is why we talk so much about how you can't just focus on these sort of like technological solutions, because if you look at, you know, electric cars and solar and electrifying everything, what does that require? Batteries. What do batteries require? Lithium. Where's lithium? Oh, there's a ton of it in Bolivia. Like, what's going to happen with that, you know, power structure? So if we haven't changed this sort of colonial mindset, then it's just going to be, you know, a different flavor of the same problem. And like I saw someone in the chat said green colonialism. Yeah, exactly. It's like war, but make it green. No, I don't care if like the F-1 bombers are flying with like algae biofuel in them, you know? And I don't care if like the environmental devastation is somehow connected to electric cars instead of oil wells, you know? So yeah.
I mean, I also learned a lot in our episode about climate reparations with Tamara Tolz-Laughlin, in our episode about climate change and political reporting with Kate Aronoff. Rihanna Gunn-Wright came on for our anniversary episode last year to like break down the, at that point, undecided election. Well, actually it was decided. But
that was a nail biter that day though.
No, that you're thinking of Rania. That was my actual birthday, which was the day after the election. But like a few weeks later, the election results were decided, but the fate of the world was not clear. So that was a nail biter of a conversation. It's wild to think of how much we've come through in the past year.
It's totally insane to me that the Capitol insurrection was like a few months ago. Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I'm excited for some of our future episodes. Like I do, the first season, we were just like trying to break down that week's news coverage. And the newsletter gave us a way out of that. And now we get to do these themed episodes and some of the things we're thinking of talking about in the future. And we'd love, you know, suggestions in the chats for themes to talk about on the show. But one of them is refugees and public health and well, I mean, we're going to keep talking about like white nationalism. We could do a million shows on that, but yeah, I'm excited to see where we're going to go in the next few seasons.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like maybe we should open it up to questions.
Yeah, let's do that.
Or comments. Yeah, we're doing ecofascism and white nationalism.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yes.
I think our moderator is coming back for the Q&A portion.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Feel free to ask questions, folks, or if you, my name is not PowerShip Network, but feel free to ask questions in the chat or raise your hand. I see circular economy here, and I'm curious to know if there are more words for your question, Lily.
Or is that a show idea? I did see
it could be. Yes, that would be.
Someone asked earlier on about what does give us sort of like optimism or the ability to keep going and all of that kind of thing. Do you have I feel like my answer on that changes almost weekly, but but do you have a current answer for that, Mary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was getting at with the cycle of climate grief. Is different every day. I don't put pressure on myself to feel hopeful. I rarely feel hopeful. I feel determined. I feel spiteful. I feel like if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out swinging. You know what I mean? Like, I think like a lot of the time that question is getting at, do you think we're going to win? I don't think about winning. I think about whether or not it's worth it. And if it's worth it, you fight anyway. So.
Yeah, same. I feel like it's like just sort of I don't know. To me, I'm just like, well, I know that it's the right thing. I don't know. Like you keep doing it because you know it's the right thing to do. And yeah, I don't know. That's it. And honestly, I will have to say that the fact that like I know from I'm sorry, I keep hitting my table. I know from a couple of like sort of internal documents that I've seen recently that the oil companies are shitting their pants about how much their like marketing is not working. That makes me happy.
Yeah, I think that like rage is what I think is like there's this assumption that you have, if you're working on climate, you have to be hopeful, and it's very similar to like anybody who works on climate and talks about it publicly is used to that question of what gives you hope, why are you hopeful, blah, blah, blah. And it's very similar to civil rights activists in the 60s being asked, are you angry? And it was always like a trick question, because it's like, I can't tell you I'm angry, but of course I'm angry. You know what I mean? And it's like, it almost becomes like you have to perform this emotion or give forgiveness. In their case, it was more about like giving forgiveness and like promising nothing, you know, Black people aren't mad at you. And in the case of climate, it's kind of like, I feel like I'm being asked to reassure, and I can't reassure. And I don't think hope can be given. I think hope has to be earned. And so, you know, hope can be indispensable for some people, and for other people, completely immaterial. For me, it is immaterial.
Yeah. There's some people with their hands raised.
I'm gonna ask one question. I'm gonna read a question from the chat and then answer, or like answer humans who are raising their hands. But one person said, curious as to how white supremacy is involved in the climate movement, which I really want to make sure.
In the movement itself, or in the problem of climate change?
I think
it's in both.
Both. I think it would be great for you to answer both.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I think, you know, you don't really get a problem like climate change without white supremacy first. You know, it is a problem that comes out of a small group of people having an outsized amount of power and making decisions for everybody else, you know. And there is the like the oil, and I mean, in really basic ways, like the oil industry is built on slavery, extractive labor practices, colonialism, all of those kinds of things. And then in terms of the climate movement, I think for a really long time, I mean, in fact, we talked to Rev Yearwood about this, that like the environmental movement really was created at the same time that the civil rights movement was picking up steam, and was kind of created as like we don't want to be involved in the civil rights movement. It's like a little separate movement over here for mostly white people to like focus on nature. And there's some of those roots are really like still reverberating through the movement today, where you have people who do have a real hard time getting their arms around the idea of climate as a justice issue, climate as a human issue. And then there's like the whole eco-fascism component, which I'll let you speak to, along with everything else that you might want to say.
Yeah, I think the other way it shows up in the climate movement is that like the fact that environmental justice exists as a separate thing is like all the proof you kind of need, right? So like there's like these mainstream environmentalists and climate, like first of all, the fact that science is such a white area, and it got that way very much on purpose. And you know, you had these people working on the problem of climate change or environmentalism, and they were creating solutions that had allowable casualties, and those allowable casualties were largely Black and brown communities. And so they weren't creating solutions so much as they were creating problems for other communities, right? And so it was like, you guys can fix that on the back end, and we'll call y'all the environmental justice movement. We're the real environmental movement. We do the real stuff, right? Like you go, we'll just, you know, silo you over there. And then, you know, you get to 2018 and the IPCC puts out this huge report that's telling everybody just how bad climate change really is in no uncertain terms. And it's like, oh, so y'all failed. Y'all had no idea what you were doing. You actually need us in that room. And that report also said that like the quickest way to getting to 1.5 degrees of warming is to do it in a comprehensive and justice oriented way. So the commitment to white supremacy really fooled the environmental movement into thinking it had all the solutions by itself. Right? That they didn't need to deal with racism, that they didn't need to look at the social constructs that led to the problem. So like, I think about the fact that if they had thought about those things, we probably wouldn't have had fucking climate change.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, people who look like me created the problem, so people look like me are going to solve the problem. Like that math doesn't math. Right? Like that doesn't track at all. So I blame white supremacy completely and wholly for the climate crisis. And
then in terms of, you know, sort of white supremacy and climate 2.0, you have already emerging eco-fascist tendencies, which are like, you know, hoarding resources. Okay, the climate crisis is coming, so I'm going to you know, keep these things for my people, and all you people are taking resources, and you know, and that whole kind of approach to and honestly, like the green colonialism stuff too. You see it in that as well. It's like, oh, well, we'll be fine because we're going to drive, you know, electric vehicles, but like sucks to be Bolivia. I don't know.
No, it's a problem.
Okay, next question. Sorry. Yes.
Diana, I just invited you to unmute.
Yeah, so I was wondering more along the lines of hopefulness about how you guys bring yourselves to continue doing this work despite the difficulties and despite the grim projections in the future. Because I imagine it's really hard sometimes to feel like perseverance under those times.
Yeah, so I asked my mom this question about, you know, my family was involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And it was like, well, I asked her if she was scared. And her answer to me was like, no, we were pissed. And that's how I feel about this. Like, what keeps me moving? I'm pissed the fuck off.
Yeah.
You know, like someone's legit trying to kill me and everything that I love. I'm fucking angry.
Yeah.
And giving up is just like simply not an option.
Yeah. I think I'm the same. I feel like it's like, I don't know, righteous indignation. Like, I'm just like, it's so unfair. And I don't know. I think, yeah, I feel like I've had like a lifelong sort of, fight for the underdog mentality. And like right now, humanity is the underdog. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Amy's a Cancer. I'm a Scorpio. We're petty and spiteful as fuck.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ra, I just invited you to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Water sign gang. Thank you. Scorpio as well. So thank you so much for talking about this, especially from like a communication aspect and everything with climate justice and just a lot of different angles I wasn't aware of. I currently, I work in communications as well. And I work in communications for people with intellectual disabilities and whatnot. And I was wondering if I could get some advice from you two on how I can bring the intersectionality of all these different topics into that conversation.
Well, I mean, I think people with all kinds of disabilities are uniquely kind of disadvantaged and left out of the climate conversation for sure. So maybe looking at, are there specific impacts for this community? Because, it helps to start with like where, with things that will directly impact people. And then really looking at where are they being left out of the conversation? Where is this community like being left out of the conversation in ways that will make it harder for them to adapt in a warming world, and deal with like the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, I'll just add that like I've learned a lot about disability rights through like Twitter, and also how they intersect specifically with climate change and climate action. So Alice Wong is someone I follow on Twitter. I've learned a great deal from her, and Imani Barbarin. They don't talk about climate change exclusively or even like a lot, but when they do, I learn a great deal from them. I think a lot of climate solutions that people propose are like extraordinarily ableist. Like, remember there was that huge thing about getting rid of plastic straws? And it's like, wait, guys, like we kind of need those. you know, like this sort of like absolutism around climate change. And like it's another big part of the reason why individual action, and we talk about this on one of our more recent episodes, like what we think of as individual action is really consumer action, which is really capitalist action. And the over-reliance on that as the solution to climate change leaves a lot of people out, and sort of makes it seem like you're a bad person for not being able to do everything. And if you're a bad person because you have a disability, then what the hell are we saying?
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Hello, I think I'm asking next. Funny 3 Scorpios in a row there. My question, I just recently, as of like 2019, was like reintroduced to the whole like movement and world, and actually like wanting to educate myself once I was like kind of done with high school. So my question for anyone who's been here way longer than I have is, what would you like us to know as people that are following you about the climate movement that you grew up in, how fast things have changed, or like what we should be aware of when we're talking and working with people that have already been here and fought this fight for much longer than we have, and like what we need to know in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. Honestly, I feel like I actually like the thing that sort of seems to kind of keep coming around again a lot is this kind of obsession with technological solutions. And I just feel like it's kind of a good thing to watch out for, because to me it's sort of like, I'm not against technology or research, and I know that we need to like know more about all of the potential solutions and all that stuff, but it often gets used as like it's sort of like a smokescreen for just not actually doing anything about the underlying kind of really intractable justice issues. So I think that like, yeah, keeping an eye on that. And then also just, I feel like we talk about equity in the impacts a lot, but we don't talk about equity in the solutions enough at all. And even with non-technology, like non-tech stuff, I remember very clearly, I'm in California, so I have like a California context for this answer, where it's like, we passed a carbon cap and trade bill in California, and no environmental justice people were involved in the policy making in that. And so what happened was that like all the pollution just got crammed even more into particular communities, mostly like Richmond, California, which has just been like shit on from right and left for years. And it's like, geez, did we really not think that like, having a system that sort of like let some people pollute, but you could pay more if you wanted to pollute more, and this, that, whatever, that it wouldn't end up in this situation where it is so I don't know, so much more of a burden for some communities than others. So I feel like, yeah, like kind of learning those lessons of like, I almost feel like it's more important to learn the lessons of like where sort of benevolent racism failed, like created more problems, these ideas of like, no, we're helping, like, maybe like make sure that we're listening to the people in those communities about how this is going to impact them. I see it now with like, there is this way that the fossil fuel industry is painting energy transition as something that's going to disadvantage people of color. And it's a very believable narrative because the environmental movement has allowed that to happen many times. So like, I think hopefully we can get to a place where that is not such an easy narrative to spin, because there are lots of examples we can point to of it not happening. Yeah. That's my take as an old head. What about you, Mary?
I don't know if I qualify as an old head. I mean, I'm definitely like 37 whole years old, but I haven't been in climate work for that long. I've only been doing it since 2014. But I'll just say, like, as an adult who's like, I mean, I guess kept kind of existed in movement spaces, like understand it, like nobody knows everything. And most people don't know much of anything. So like trust your instincts, and don't think that just because you're younger or newer that you can't question things.
Yeah, ask questions and listen. I just feel like that is something that in general, I also think that this is something I've been thinking about more lately, that like you can't just expect a group of any kind to like be more equitable just because it has a diverse population in it. Like you have to actually consciously behave and structure things differently. It's not going to just like magically be, not capitalist or not, or not have this sort of like patriarchal power structure or whatever, simply because there are more women or more people of color or whatever. Like you have to actually like,
you have to do the work.
You have to do the work, and you have to be intentional about doing things differently. Which actually I think young people are much better at than the people that have been, in the movement for a long time. Yeah.
And also just know that the movement needs you. You might not think you matter, but you do. Yeah. So I think that's a good place to leave it. Also, we have like literally 1 minute left.
Oh yeah, perfect. We did good. We did good. Awesome. Danny or Audrey, our bosses,
Let us know if we did a good job or not.
I'm gonna relay it to my boss.
Okay.
Mikael, who's on our
Okay.
board.
Oh, Mikkel. Yeah.
I think I need to
over
find him to unmute. It's technology.
Oh, technology. Oh, there he is.
Oh,
He needs
there we
someone
go.
needs- Oh, there we go. Okay.
There we go. Thank you. I am back. I feel like we just all were part of one giant hot take episode, and what an honor that is. Incredible.
Were we
Thank you.
recording? Because we could totally do that.
we should just do it. That was just like it was a test run. We could have 100-person hot take episode, and we were all part of it. And I hope everyone feels the honor. Thank you, Mary and Amy, for that. So incredible.
Thanks for having
I'm
us.
really bummed that I can't be on video to see everyone's faces and be there in New Orleans. That would have been really awesome. But
Yeah.
there's so much wisdom from what y'all like just ran us through. I think communications is so important because spoken word and language has been the way that our civilization has communicated forever. And it's gotten us to this point here, and it's such a deep connection to like who we are as people.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you were reflecting on that I'm just sitting with is many times we talk about the science, the 1.5 degrees, and what does that mean, and what does 1.6 mean, and 1.7. And I've really held pretty strongly that the difference between 1.5 and 1.6 is too many people. And we don't talk about that enough. And it might sound like science, but really it's a human issue. And it's something that we all have to grapple with. And so thank you for bringing the communications that we're going to need for the future to like really take this thing on head on. And again, just thank you so much for being a part of this. And really quickly, just like a note for just future logistics for everyone as you're taking your way through Power Shift Convergence, which we just started today. There's so many more headliners, so much more info, is to really make sure that you're registered for the convergence. The headliners are free. It's awesome, great information, but also there's a bunch of like grassroots organizers, BIPOC organizers, folks across the movement that are talking about some of these very issues and solutions. Make sure to go to the schedule to claim your seats, your virtual seats. Join the convo on Slack, the conversation on Slack, and be friends with us. Join us on social media, follow, tweet, share stuff on Facebook, do it all, because this is the kinds of conversations we need to be having as a movement. And let's hold this moment as our place to power ourselves up and catapult ourselves into the organizing we need to do in the months and years ahead. So thank you everyone so much. Really appreciate you all making it out. And thank you again, Amy and Mary.
Yay, thank you.